that's I'm spinning and waiting. Here we go. It is live. So I'm muted there. I should be muted there. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the May 2021 meeting of the El Dorado Hills Area Planning Advisory Committee. I'm the committee chair, John Davey. With us tonight from our officers, John Reisler, vice chair, Tim White, vice chair, and I don't see Brooke in yet, but Brooke might check in with us in a bit. So as we get underway, the first order of business tonight, and let me get to the right screen, and I'll share that for you. And there we go. So the first order of business tonight is call the meeting to order, and we adopt our meeting agenda. So if there are no objections from APAC officers, our agenda is very simple tonight. I like it that way. So seeing no objection from officers, we'll keep moving along. At the beginning of all of our meetings, we offer the opportunity for public comment for any matter that's not on our agenda. So if it's something we're going to talk about tonight, when we get to that subject, we'll do raise hands or press the *9 on your cell phone to or your phone to request an opportunity to speak. I'm going to go ahead and stop this here. And so with that, I'm going to ask if there are any members of the attendee list that would like to have a public comment on something that's not on the agenda tonight. We're going to allow 3 minutes, and then we need to move on with the agenda. So each person will accommodate you for your request. So I see Hillary has her hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute, Hillary, and then you should be able to have your say.
No, I had nothing to say. I'm sorry. I don't know why my hand was up.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. I'll go ahead and ignore that then. So we'll go around one more time. It's like being at the auction. Is there anybody else that would like to raise their hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone if you want to write some comments? Okay, seeing none. Boy, that makes it easy. The next item on our agenda tonight, at every APAC meeting, we have an opportunity to hear from Supervisor Heidel, our District 1 supervisor, about activities or events or news that are going on at the county level. So, John, even though it does say your name is Cindy,
yep.
That's to our benefit.
Yeah, I have 3 brief comments I'd like to make tonight. And some of you know, but a lot of you probably haven't heard yet, Costco has reactivated their previous applications with the county. They are working integrally with AKT to develop the project sites together. So their CEQA documents, I'm assuming, will be done together. That's kind of the way they started. It sounded like it was going to shift to being more independent, but President, it seems like it's coming back to a single application and processing it through with 2 different build cycles, so to speak. So we'll have to learn more and understand more as that comes available. I will tell you that they had talked about the underground parking. They have abandoned that idea. They talked about overhead on the roof type of parking. They've abandoned that idea, and they actually have a overhead parking provision using the slopes where there would be a lower parking area than an upper tier over the top of it, but done without putting it on top of the building or without major excavation other than some kind of a wall structure. But it's different. I'll say that the one thing that I was a little disappointed that came out of it, it sounds like they will not have a fuel island associated with this Costco. So no gas, no diesel. I'm not sure if that's going to change or not, but that's what we're hearing right now is they do not intend to put the gasoline services on the facility. So subject to change, that's the Costco input. The second one, many of you know that the county will be receiving federal American Rescue Plan funds. $37.3 million is El Dorado County's share of those federal funds to come in to support impacts from COVID. It's going to be made in 2 payments. The first payment is supposed to be received this month. That's roughly $18.6 million. The second payment is supposed to be in a 12 to 18 month period. And again, the same amount, $18.6 million roughly. So the county is gone through and read all of the recently released 151 page document that talks about all the criteria for eligibility and what does and what doesn't apply. And so we're trying to weed through all that to determine how we can best distribute those funds. not only at the county level, but with other interests. For instance, in the past, we helped schools, we helped small businesses with some of the money that we received in CARES Act. So that may clearly be part of the mix. I'm sure there will not be a lack of asks associated with organizations and different groups that want to utilize that money, but the county will be having to sort through it and determine what the best utilization is and then acting on it. The third item just occurred this last Tuesday at our Board of Supervisors meeting. Our sheriff had proposed a body-worn camera program be funded in the current time frame. The board made a decision, unanimous 5-0, to go ahead and provide the funding for that as part of our next year's budget. So our 21-22 budget will include over $2 million to cover the initial investment for the equipment, for the software, and for the staffing of 4 new members of the Sheriff's Department. So we're headed down that path. We'll see how it evolves. We recognize that the district attorney will probably have, again, asks for staff to support the cameras, because a lot of the real utilization from the public's perspective is in prosecutions where the DA would have that camera data to go to trial with, and hopefully that will settle a lot of trials real early, because like the video that's been taken at some of the crime scenes by some of the drones, when you can present data that shows exactly what happened, or a reenactment that's pretty accurate, which is what the DA is primarily doing in some of the scenes in the past, it's hard for most attorneys to want to push for a jury trial and run it through its length. So I'm hoping that's going to reduce the backlog in some of our criminal justice cases and other cases that DA has to prosecute. There's probably also a public defender need for some of that information, but to a much more limited level. So my personal concern is it's going to increase the number of public request acts that we receive, the Public Information Act information, FOIAs, whatever you want to call it, that now that any time somebody knows that there was a deputy sheriff at a scene with a camera, they can ask for that footage. And there's certain requirements in terms of when it has to be provided, how it has to be provided. But I'm just concerned it becomes more than just a crime scene thing. It becomes, oh, I want to know what happened at this peaceful demonstration that was held downtown, and what did the sheriff's office say to these people? And so I hope we don't get into that muck, but I can only imagine where that might evolve to. But we're expecting a substantial increase in number of PRAs as a result of it. But it's the right thing to do, and now's the right time to do it, because we do have some additional fund balance carryover monies to go ahead and make that happen. So we're going to honor the sheriff's request and put that in place, and we'll all see how it develops. So those are the 3 things I wanted to cover tonight. Thank you, John.
Okay. And so we also provide an opportunity if any of the members of our audience wish to seek some clarification from Supervisor Heidel on any of those 3 items. If you want to go ahead and push the raise hand button or the *9 to talk, go ahead and do so now, and we'll afford you the opportunity to have that discussion. Hillary, your hand's up again. Did you have a question?
My thing says my hand is lowered, so I don't know what's going on. On my screen, it says my hand is lowered. So
okay. I'll go ahead and lower.
Is it lowered now?
It sure is, but it does look like you're waving at us, so it's always nice. So.
No, I'm trying to figure out. I was trying to lower it, and I don't know what's going on with my screen. Sorry.
No problem. So I don't see any other hands coming up. Going once, twice. Sold. Okay, thank you, Supervisor Heidel. And let's see, we're going to, I'm going to jump into this here so you can see what's going on. So tonight we have sort of a sole topic. Tonight we're talking about the Central El Dorado Hills specific plan. There's a second recirculated draft environmental impact report. We've looked at this plan before in the past. APAC has studied it many times. We provided our feedback for the first draft, for the final. So here we are tonight, and I'm just going to give a synopsis real quick because I know that Kirk and Andrea are here from Serrano Associates, and they're here to talk about the recirculated part of the draft environmental impact report, not what we've talked about in the past. So some things I'm sure we'll touch on, but just to get everybody up to speed. So the Central El Dorado Hills specific plan, the final environmental impact report was released in November, October 2019. They've had three hearings at the Planning Commission, very well attended, a lot of public feedback. We do have a recirculated draft environmental environmental impact report now that was released on April 30th. It's a 45-day review and comment period that closes on June 14th. There will be a Planning Commission workshop on May 27th that is solely focused on this recirculated element of the draft environmental impact report. It's primarily comprised of the vehicle miles traveled analysis and some new project alternatives that the applicant have provided. In the original project that we looked at and studied, there were 3 alternatives. There was a no project alternative, a reduced density alternative, and a reduced wetland impact alternative. And tonight, Kirk and Andrea will be talking about the VMT analysis that has been completed, and about the alternative 4, which is a zoning consistent alternative, and alternative 5, which is a senior living alternative. And just so everyone's up to speed, the project area is here on the screen. There are 2 planned areas, the Pedrical area on the west, the east, I can't even talk about the west, and Serrano west side, ironically on the east of El Dorado Hills Boulevard, but it's the west of existing Serrano development. Jump ahead here, and just so we know what we're talking about, the west side land use looks something like this. We're not going to delve too deep into it. There are some different densities of residential villages, and then there's a lot of open space. There's limited civic commercial opportunity, roads and landscaping, and basically we're talking about 234 acres. On the other side of El Dorado Hills Boulevard would be the Pedrical land area, the planned area, some low density residential development, and then some higher density residential development, which would be between the existing apartment complexes there between Olson Lane and Wilson Boulevard on the west side of El Dorado Hills Boulevard. So I believe with that, I went too far. I'm going to go ahead and stop this screen share, and then I'm going to ask Kirk and Andrea to take it away. And whenever you need to share a screen, I believe you guys are enabled. You should be able to do that.
Yeah. Why don't we screen share just the land use map, Andrea, real quick? Just get that up on the screen, and then even though we're not here to specifically talk about that, obviously that just kind of keeps people's minds focused. So what you have before you is a recirculated draft EIR. What prompted that requirement is the VMT analysis, which as we've talked about lots of times before, as of July 1, 2020, the state of California has directed local land use authorities to evaluate traffic not based upon level of service, but on how far people travel to go to wherever they go on their particular day, whether it's school, work, doctor, recreation. So level of service is no longer a CEQA issue. We do have a general plan issue when we have general plan rules that we have to comply with, but it is no longer a CEQA issue. So that's what triggers this recirculation, and with CEQA the way it is, we and the county staff didn't believe that anything short of a formal recirculation of this part of the draft, this particular issue made sense. As John pointed out before, we recirculated some things on air quality and greenhouse gases in 2016, actually that almost concurrently with the release of the draft EIR. So what prompted the recirculation is the VMT analysis. The Board of Supervisors adopted guidance for that at the end of last year. We then went to work with our consultants and county staff, and that's the study that you have. So what I wanted to share with you this evening is a couple of things. One, if you'll remember back to the January 2020 Planning Commission hearing at the church, in my mind, there was 4 things that we were going to have to work on before this project could resurface and get into another public conversation. One is the VMT analysis, which is in here now, and I gave you the background on that. From our perspective as a developer, the news is good. The project exceeds, which is kind of interesting. The VMT level is less than the goal that the county established back in either October or November of last year. So that's that's good news for us. The second issue that the second box that we had to check was to work with the Community Services District on an acquisition or some kind of joint use with them on the golf course part of the old executive golf course part of the project, which is basically the Serrano West Side minus the two existing villages in El Dorado Hills Pacific Plan, and I'm sure we'll have some questions on that. That would be lot, let me get my notes out here, lot D1, lot C and D, which are kind of located along the adjacent to Serrano Village D1 that you'll see in the upper right-hand corner of the land use map. I think as most of you know, the CSD announced last fall that they had decided they had no interest in acquiring the property. I will tell you that that was the culmination of, we had multiple meetings with the CSD through the winter and spring and summer of last year. And that's the decision they came to. So we can kind of check that box off at this point. The third issue was, there was a lot of conversation about no general plan amendment, don't change the zoning, leave it the way it is. And I think there was some confusion there. The general plan designation is open space, but the underlying zoning is RFH, which if you've had a chance to read means recreational facilities higher or fairly intense recreational uses. So there's kind of two things going there. And I think perhaps in the public's mind, they thought open space meant it would just be like it is today or something like that. And that's not what the underlying zoning allows. There is a bit of history on that RFH zoning that I need to share with you is that when the county adopted the TGPA ZOU in December of 15, which was after we released the initial environmental document, they refined and clarified the uses which were allowed in the RFH zone. It was too late to include those in, and frankly, as many of you know, the TGPA ZOU was subject to litigation, and I think there's a discussion in here somewhere, but I don't think it was as a practical matter effective until the courts ruled, which I think was sometime in 2017. So we didn't focus much on that, but when folks announced that they really didn't want to change the zoning, we went back and spent quite a bit of time with staff last summer, making sure we were clear about the kinds of uses that would work in the RFH zone. And I want to be clear, the RFH zone only applies to the old executive golf course portion of the project, which is primarily the Serrano West Side planning area, but there are some pieces of that West Side planning area that are actually covered in the El Dorado Hills specific plan, including the two residential villages, D1's lots C and D, which I mentioned before. So we got a pretty clear understanding with the staff this summer, the kinds of uses that would be allowed there. And they are articulated very clearly in the alternative 4 analysis. You know, we hotels, Topgolf, aquatic center, the reporting in both the Business Journal and the Village to Life were correct on the kinds of uses that were going to be allowed in that zone. Some of the uses are by right, which basically means you go in and get a building permit. Others of those kinds of uses require a conditional use permit or some other kind of, I guess, discretionary approval, but only in the sense that they are consistent with the existing zoning. And a lot of those focus on design review and color of buildings and things like that. So that was that use. And then the other box that kind of came up in the conversation, I thought in January, was, are there some other alternative uses? Are there alternative uses that might be of interest to somebody that are economically feasible as well? And we didn't have anything in our thoughts, but we kept our eyes and ears open for somebody who might be interested in that. And I don't know, Andrew, maybe last summer sometime, spring, I don't know when it was, we were approached by a national company that operates and constructs and builds retirement projects, not unlike Eschaton, for example, which is a local one. And what they expressed interest in, which is alternative 5, is constructing a CCRC, or a continuing care retirement community, on the property south of Serrano Parkway, down to Highway 50. And that kind of conceptual project is also described in an alternative 5 fairly clearly. And we spent some time with that operator on that. Now, that's not consistent with underlying zoning. I believe that that would take a general plan amendment as well, and would not be covered, probably couldn't utilize the existing CEQA document for that approval. So that's kind of where we landed. From a timing standpoint, John outlined that as well. There'll be a workshop on May 27th. And it's really a staff-driven workshop. I'm not precisely sure at this point what they intend to cover, although it's my understanding that they will spend a decent amount of time on VMT, both specifically and generally about how that works. And probably some explanation of the alternatives, but I think they're still formulating their game plan there. So with that, what I want to remind folks is that the proposed project, which is evaluated in the EIR, is not changed. You will remember, however, that as we negotiated a development agreement with county staff in 2019, we did end up with a project that reduced the density to about 737 units from 1,000. Although if the high density, if the VRH was senior, it could go back up to 1,000. So the proposed project hasn't changed. And even though we have examined some of these alternatives, our preference is to end up with something that can utilize the existing CEQA document. It looks something like the proposed project. One other comment I'd like to make on the zoning consistent alternative. As a practical matter, it probably could be described as a no project alternative, but since one was already out there, we decided that to keep life simple and less complicated for folks, we would call it a zoning consistent alternative. And one of the things that I want to mention is that the CEQA, the guidance that we get from the state on how to proceed on a CEQA project says that you have to have as one of your alternatives a no project alternative. And I would substitute that phrase for zoning consistent. And I'm actually reading directly from the guidelines, which describes the reasonably foreseeable probable future conditions if the proposed project is not approved. So that's kind of where we landed on that. And I think with that, I'm going to ask Andrea if she wants to add anything to what I've said already.
No, I don't have anything. I think you captured the essence and the summary perfectly.
It's my understanding that the Planning Commission conversations, and you probably need to ask Chairman Vania, that will be focused primarily. I'm not sure that there'll be a revisiting of the entire project, which is that, but in fact will be focused on VMT, and I would presume some of the alternatives as well. So, and that's really what we're here tonight, is to give you an update on kind of, I think the most important thing is that I left that January 2020 meeting, so there's a couple things there, 3 or 4 things that we've got to do between now and the time this thing goes public. We've done all those. We've worked with the CSD. We've developed a vehicle miles travel analysis. We developed a no zoning change or zoning consistent alternative, and did find another alternative use that is probably economically feasible as well for the purposes of discussion. So with that, John, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Before we open it up to everyone, we'll refer to some APAC members first. But in terms of the VMT, we kind of discussed it earlier. You're sort of the first one out of the gate in terms of residential. And your project consultant was actually the consultant the county used when they're establishing their standards and their methodology. And so could you just basically have a highlight of what those findings came in at? I mean, we don't have to be detailed right now. I know the Planning Commission will probably delve into it, but in terms of where you're at, was it close, or you're well within standards?
Yeah, the basic county standard was a vehicle miles traveled based upon a countywide number, and it was probably, I know it's in the study here somewhere, and maybe while I'm talking, Andrea can find it super quick, but we're about, I think the requirement was we had to be 90% of the countywide number that the board, maybe even John can help me with this, 90% of the countywide number, and I believe we're at 85% on that. Let's see with this chart here. Yeah. So, yeah, you've got a baseline of 22.7, and the threshold. Correct me if I'm wrong. Got a couple months ago. I could have told you this in my sleep, but I think that table 314-11 really summarizes where we are. So, it actually, from a county standpoint, if the state is saying reduced vehicle miles traveled, it's very helpful on a countywide basis as well. So you can find that information again on table 314-11 of the Fair and Peers analysis. And it's really, I've been at this business for a long time, and for as long as I can remember, it was all based upon level of service and making sure you could get through intersections quickly. And that's not what VMT tells you. That's not what the state's telling you they want anymore. They just don't want you to drive very far. And I guess you could conclude from that high capacity roads with quickly moving intersections are not necessarily what you want. The benefit of this project is, more than anything else, is that it's next to Highway 50. I mean, you can do a lot of studying, but the fact that it's located on El Dorado Hills Boulevard, basically adjacent to Highway 50, really has a huge impact. Because if you think of the normal El Dorado Hills resident, the first move you make is on the local roads for the most part, especially during the peak hours, is to get on the local roads 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 miles and then get to Highway 50. Well, this project is next to Highway 50. So that's the biggest advantage that you've got on this one. And we're finding similar results in our Marble Valley VMT as well, which will be out sometime this summer. But the key is you've got to be close to Highway 50 for El Dorado County.
Okay. Well, then, since I asked my first question, I'll go ahead and turn it open to our APAC voting members. Would anybody have any questions that they'd like to raise? Go ahead and raise hand, or looks like
John, I'd like to just ask Kurt a question. Does LOS, the county LOS rules and regulations, do they play any part in this at all?
To some extent they might, John, but for the most part, no. But we still have to comply with the county rules on level of service.
So in other words, the county could turn around and say, your project does not comply with the LOS of the county, and they could ask you to change something or deny the project.
Yes, they could, but we've done that analysis, and we already comply with the level of service. That was the initial traffic studies that we did way back when, and have updated periodically.
Okay. One other thing I would like to ask, could you put something up on the screen that shows the executive golf course, not after your plan, but prior to your plan? Do you have that available?
I have a land use map. I'm not sure what more.
Because
I'm not sure I understand your question.
I'm looking at what you have down as a park down at the bottom of your proposal. And I don't know how much of the original golf course you're actually setting aside as a park.
Oh, yeah. In the proposed project, it's the 15 acres that's down at the bottom in the super dark green there, John.
So that's 15 acres out of how many?
Well, the golf course in and of itself is about 98. We actually exceed for there's a standard for land dedication. It's called the Quimby Act. And we actually, even for the proposed project with the 15 acres, we exceed the park requirements by 2 or 3 acres, I think. So we're over on parkland dedication with that 15-acre park there.
And who is going to work on that park? Are you going to have the CSD build on it, to put money towards it, or are you going to do that?
You'd have to ask the CSD that question. They're the first stop in that conversation. We've never necessarily objected to doing some park construction in return for credit against park capital fees, but the indications that we've got from the CSD that if there is a park there, they would develop it themselves.
All right. Thank you, Kurt.
Okay, Tim, your hand is up. Jump on in.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kurt and Andre, for being here tonight. We appreciate that. I was really surprised in the recirculated draft that you were presenting 2 new alternatives. I think we were all expecting that we were only going to be seeing a VMT traffic analysis, and I think you sort of went beyond what you were legally required to do to present the alternatives. So I appreciate the fact that you took the time and effort to listen to the community to see what other uses might be available. So as you know, as we get further into this and other people who are participating tonight have more questions on the alternatives, and as people have a chance to read the 200 pages of alternatives, it'll be interesting to see how this goes forward. So thank you at least for providing additional alternatives.
Yeah. And remember, alternatives aren't the basis for, well, in the case of the zoning consistent alternative, then that's a project because it's consistent with the underlying zoning. Obviously, there's some things that have to be done there, but in the case of the senior project, you probably have to go back to near square one on the CEQA document. So, you know, alternatives aren't about creating a project that can be approved with the current document. If you go back to what I said, it describes foreseeable probable future conditions if the proposed project is not approved. And CEQA in the beginning was all about making sure that the public and decision makers had all the information that they needed to make informed decisions. It's morphed into all sorts of other things now, but CEQA was primarily established as an information gathering tool for decision makers in the public and how to mitigate impacts as they arose. So, but we thought that was one, like I said, John, we thought we had to check those boxes before this thing could see the light of day again.
Right. So, John, Richard, your hand's up.
Hi, guys. Following up on Tim and what you just said, Kirk, I too was surprised to see the new alternatives. And just to clarify on that, so the purpose of the new alternatives wasn't to say, hey, let's discuss these alternatives at this point in time. Was it really to say, if this specific plan does not get approved, then this is what you're looking at?
Let me try to answer that question as carefully as I can. CEQA requires that the decision makers in the public know what just got foreseeable probable future conditions if the proposed project is not approved. As I said, as I finished my comments, we would prefer a project that looks like this one or something like this one. That's our choice. But you know, the message that we got back in January 2020 was don't change the zoning, don't do a general plan amendment, and alternative 4 accomplishes that situation or answers that question or responds to that concern.
Okay. And then, so it sounds like if this were turned down and you went with zoning consistent, then we would not have a specific plan on either.
Probably wouldn't be a need for that necessarily, John. I don't know it. You just don't get into the alternatives that CEQA requires you to just don't require you to, nor spend the time and money and effort to figure out that level of detail. But I don't know that it would be necessary, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like it would be to me, but obviously there are a ton of considerations.
Yeah.
And then finally, just in terms of more detail on the zoning consistent, I thought that was a pretty intriguing section. And one question I have on that is the proposed uses. I appreciate that you all pointed out the uses in the zoning ordinance. I think that's important for people to look at and to be aware of. And but one, some of the conditional use items, for instance, a hotel, the way I read that ordinance is that, it's a special purpose zone, and sub to that, it's a recreational facility zone. And then sub to that, there's a table of allowed uses, matrix of allowed uses, which includes, hotel, and some of these other things that might sound pretty scary to people. And so my question for you is, do you feel that, or do you read that section of the code to allow a hotel, even if it's not in support of a recreational use on a recreational facility zoning?
I think, I don't know, Andrew, you studied it even more than I did, but I think it's an allowed use in the RFH zone. I mean, clearly the concept is you got to have one to have the other. So I don't know, Andrew, you may have some thoughts on that too.
I think it is a permitted use. Of course, the CUP is more of a site-specific discretionary review to control things that might be, particular to a site, whether it's, in terms of lighting or usage or noise or hours of operation or, what have you. Given the 98 acres of the golf course, I mean, that's quite a large area to have completely in a hotel use. But if the intent of the RFH zone was to provide for more active recreation where you can accomplish a range of opportunities like a, outdoor sporting complex that could house tournaments on the weekends, and people are having to spend time here for the weekend, they're going to need a place to spend the night. And then if they're spending the night, what supportive services do they have in terms of, general merchandise or, food opportunities, that kind of thing. So I think, I wasn't part of drafting the RFH zone. Obviously, that's something that we'd have to ask the county about. But it seems like when you look at the range of the more intensive recreational uses that could occur in the site, there's a lot of, complementary supportive services that go along with it, which a hotel situation would be certainly.
And that's exactly how I read the ordinance, is that those uses would be in support of recreation, not just freestanding on their own. For instance, in the actual wording of the code, it talks about the RFH being applied to promote recreational use. And so otherwise it'd be zone commercial. That's where the hotel zoning is. But anyway, okay, well, I appreciate it. I really appreciate your effort on this and coming and talking with us about it.
Okay, are there any more APAC voting members who have questions? Because we have a couple in our attendee list that I'm going to go to. Okay, going back. So the first person who had their hand up was Noel Maddock. And so Noel, if you want to go ahead and unmute, we'll love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you for this opportunity to hear the presentation this evening. And I just would like to make one small correction in what Kirk had said. He had mentioned that the CSD had no interest in the property. That isn't actually our stance and wasn't our stance. Our stance was that if it was affordable and if there was an opportunity that this property came forward again in the future, we are absolutely still interested in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Bill Knox, your hand is up. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute, you are ready to go.
I am unmuted, and thank you very much. And I live in the Four Seasons along with Mr. Rasslinger. And I'm sorry, I just joined the meeting lately. So, I mean, just late tonight. So my apologies. I just wanted to ask Kirk if what's the definition of VMT?
VMT is an acronym for vehicle miles traveled.
That's what I thought. I
Yes.
didn't know if there was anything else involved with that.
No.
Okay.
And it's the state of California taking a look at greenhouse gas emissions from automobiles. And you got to read the study, but you have a bunch of guidance. Basically, it's the idea: if people don't drive their cars as far, they will emit less greenhouse gases, and that's the gist of where the state planners have directed y'all.
Okay. Can I ask another question?
Sure, if you
Raise my
get
hand?
it out there. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. My question is that we initially, when we've been in El Dorado Hills area for a long time, in and out. And when we first came here, it was probably the early 1970s, and the El Dorado Hills golf course was still there. In fact, I played a number of holes there. I'm not saying how well I played them, but I enjoyed that. And Kirk, I wondered if, and Andrea, if you wouldn't mind just kind of walking us through the history of basically the demise of the El Dorado golf course to where we are today.
I'd be happy to do that. And
Sure.
I will tell you that it's covered in fairly good detail in I believe the staff report that was prepared for the Planning Commission meeting in January or late in 2019.
Okay.
But here's the situation. That course was established as a temporary course in the early 60s. Heidel probably knows when it started. It was supposed to be a temporary course. It was a short course. It was a par 62,
Right.
if I remember correctly.
Right.
And the Sacramento area for a long period of time, up until probably the late 1990s or early 2000s, suffered from a shortage of golf courses, and rounds of play were significant, even on a substandard, not necessarily substandard, but not a standard par 18 course. At its peak, I think in the late 1990s or early 2000s, rounds of play were, I'd have to go back and double check the studies, but I think 50 or 60,000, maybe even a year there was 80,000 rounds of golf.
Okay.
If you will remember, in the early 2000s, there were a lot of golf courses built in the region. Mather course came online, which wasn't a new course, but was open to the public.
Right.
The course in Folsom came on board, and we found ourselves in a situation where we had too many golf courses, and they were standard par 18 courses, which, if you're a golfer like I am, one thing you like to do is pull out that $450 driver and hit it a whole bunch of times.
Right.
This course just didn't work for that. And by the time we closed it, is it Bill?
Yes, it is. Yes.
At the end of 2006, our rounds of play were down to under 15,000.
Wow.
And the problem is that we were, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, but our golfers were seniors for the most part who wanted to play on a shorter course, but didn't buy very many things. And the truth of the matter is, and I'll finish up with this, is that at the end of 2006 and all through 2006, we were probably losing about $250,000 a year keeping that course open.
Okay.
I like to joke that it's when somebody pulled into the parking lot in 2005 or 2006, we'd been better off giving them $10 in cash and asking them not to play. We did, but to validate that and to make sure that we were right, in early 2006, we hired the National Golf Foundation, or the NGF, and you can look them up on the web. They're the kind of the gold standard for golf course planning.
Okay.
And we had them come out and evaluate the course and what our options might be. And they concluded that in that market, and I think even more so today, I don't know that, but for that be their conclusion, that it just was not economic. It was not an economically viable commercial business. I will say that wisely, the County of El Dorado and the El Dorado Hills CSD also hired the National Golf Foundation to see if there was a business model which would allow them to take over and run the course. And that study also concluded that that didn't make any sense either. I will say, so that's kind of how we ended up where we were. It was obvious it wasn't going to work. Golf has experienced kind of a spike in, because of COVID, but I just saw a report from the National Golf Foundation, which is interesting, is that they predict by the end of 2021, what they call the non-green golf activity, which is like a Topgolf. The number of players will be greater in that area than they will be in the traditional green golf area. So that tends to validate, maybe there's changes in demographics or things like that. But Bill, it was just not a viable economic commercial business for us. And we tried, as many of you know, we invested a lot of money to clean that place up when Bill Parker and his partners took over in the late 80s and early 90s, and it just wasn't sustainable. We tried, but it just wasn't sustainable. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have, Kirk, and thank you very much.
Okay.
All right.
We
Yeah, you're welcome.
have one hand up for is it our Hogue or Hague? I don't want to say it wrong. I'm going to press a lot of talk here. Could you go ahead and unmute, and it's your opportunity to ask.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Rich Haw.
Actually, Haw.
Oh,
Rich
okay.
Haw.
Well, the glasses are on.
I was going to ask Kirk, I think, to clarify the open space category and its relation to RFH.
Well, open space is a general plan designation. Most general plan designations have an underlying zoning designation as well. So if you go to the county's general plan, there'll be like an OS or a green or something like that. And then you go into the zoning where all the zoning is, and you will find that this is zoned RFH. And it wasn't changed. I want to clarify, I don't believe the zoning wasn't changed by the TGP ZOU in 2015, but that document did significantly refine and clarify the kinds of uses that are allowed in that zone. So you can't confuse open space with zoning. They're two different things, and they go together.
So as a layperson, open space could turn into RFH to some extent?
Well, that's what's allowed in that zone, Rich, is RFH uses, which we've talked about earlier, which is, the hotel, the Topgolf, the things that support recreational facilities high.
Okay, and does the project plan go into any more detail about the use of open space?
Well, in the proposed project, it would just stay as open space, not the golf course, but some of the other pieces of it. But the alternative just says these are the kinds of uses that are allowed in that zone in the open space designation. Not a lot, and there's not like a land plan or anything like that, Rich,
Okay.
if that's what you're asking.
Well, part of the reason I'm asking the question is it seemed to me when I looked at the project in the earlier EIR that there was a distinction between open space and RFH. And I may be mistaken.
I don't know, Andrew, maybe you have an answer for that one.
Well, in the proposed project, if you can see the land use map that I have on the screen share, these green areas marked by OS are within the proposed project, those areas of the specific plan that are proposed to be natural open space to remain as is. What Kirk is describing, which was more to your specific question, was, I think as I understood it, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you were maybe focused on the open space land use designation of the former golf course, which is the 98 acres north and south of Serrano Parkway. And within that is a range of zone districts that are compatible with an open space land use, which is an RFH zone. So as another example of that, you can have in the general plan, a residential land use. And then within that land use, you could have a range of zone districts, for example, single family, multifamily, different densities that are additional layers underneath the overarching land use designation. So there's kind of two things going on. There's sort of the general plan language of what open space means versus in this proposed project and how we've laid out the specific plan, those areas of the entire specific plan that we've set aside to be natural and undisturbed, which are these green areas.
In the proposed project.
Proposed project.
And in the proposed project, the leave natural, who has title to the land, and how does that sort of stay that way in perpetuity?
Well, first of all, you'd have the zoning, and you'd probably incorporate that into development agreement, which is a contract between the county and the developer. And in Serrano, where you live, Rich, right now the developer owns the open space, but is in process of working through actually transferring it to the owners association, which I think is a good thing for a variety of reasons. So you all will control and own the open space. And I would presume in the case of the central plan, there would be an owners association there. I think that's what we intended to happen, that would control and own that open space in the light green that Andrea pointed out.
Very good. Thank you. And then one last brief question. Who owns the archery range?
The Community Services District does.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich.
Richard Ross, would you like to go ahead and unmute, and you're up next.
Thank you. Question regarding the vehicle miles traveled relative to the various alternatives. Is that calculated based upon the specific conditions of each of the alternatives?
We did do a higher level analysis, not the detailed analysis that you see for the proposed project, but we did do a higher level of analysis for VMT for did we do it for all 5 alternatives, Andrea, or did we just did it on the 2 new ones, I think, right?
Well, very high level, I mean, qualitative, not quantitative.
Yeah, right. Very high level, because CEQA doesn't require you to do that, because remember, alternatives aren't proposed projects. And if you came back, you'd have to do that analysis in more detail. Anyway, the purpose of alternatives is really to lay out to the public and the decision makers what some other uses might be.
So as to the question of what type of commercial ventures might support the allowable recreational, if there is no zoning change, how would one calculate the number for vehicles miles traveled as generated by hotels or Topgolf or whatever might be a similar activity at a sporting venue, etc.?
There are, I mean, I know it sounds a little mysterious, but it's no different than your level of service traffic analysis, where there are guidelines from the state or other professional associations that provide you with the basis for those conclusions. In other words, how many vehicle miles travels are associated with the hotel? How many vehicle miles would be associated with the top golf? How many would be associated with an aquatic center? So it's that information is available, but you don't do that level of analysis on an alternative in a CEQA document.
I guess, and the last question is, and vehicle miles traveled has no relationship to the accessibility of the roads during particular key times, et cetera. Is that correct?
What's important in VMT is being close to main transportation corridors. It doesn't, from what I've learned so far, and we're all kind of feeling our way through this thing, is that the capacity of the roadway system isn't that important. It's more important where you're located, because like I said earlier, you know, if you lived in the central El Dorado Hills specific plan up, you know, right up against Serrano Parkway or next to Country Club Drive, your primary traffic movement was to Highway 50 to get to Rancho Cordova or Folsom or even downtown Sacramento to work, you would have a resident of maybe way up on the north end of El Dorado Hills beat by 10 or 12 miles a day, just because you wouldn't be traveling that distance. So it's kind of a concept that is new in the sense that we focus for 25 or 30 years on capacity as opposed to how far we're driving.
So the last aspect of my question would be then, so the issue of evacuation in times of an emergency is not relevant whatsoever to vehicle miles traveled calculations, and that would have related more to level of service?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer that question. What I know, again, is that vehicle miles traveled has nothing to do with, it's more about where your project is located in relationship to major transportation, whether it's, in the case of El Dorado County, it's Highway 50, major transportation corridors. If you were in downtown Sacramento, I guess you'd say you're next to the closer you are to a light rail station, the less vehicle miles traveled you would go. So I don't know how the public safety fits into it exactly, to be honest with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So Robin, you're up next, and I think we have one more after that. And if you'll unmute, Robin, you're ready to go.
Oh, hello. I didn't realize I had signed up, but according to what Mr. Ross had said, don't you think that it would be important to have a handle on evacuation impacts on the highways and vehicle transit? Because it's already an impacted street. It can get very dense.
Yeah. I mean, these plans are all reviewed. Your primary emergency service provider there would be the fire department, and I think they've looked at these plans. I don't know that they've weighed in on the VMT, and I don't know that there's any proposal here to reduce the capacity of any streets or intersections.
Yeah, the thing that I've noticed just in looking when we looked at the Montana de El Dorado Phase 2 is that CEQA is consistently saying, delay times are not a factor in the environmental consideration, nor are capacity. Neither of those two things are environmental. You could argue here or there. People have opinions, but in terms of the capacity for evacuation or for the transportation system, that would be outside of the environmental review. It would be more a function of the Department of Transportation or other elements of the county planning process.
And fire safety is very high on everybody's radar screen these days in terms of planning. So,
yeah, and it's not just the ability to get to the highway. Stuck in traffic would impact air quality, because you'd have emissions and people just. I am finishing up work with fire victims from the Paradise fires, and heard stories of people trying to get out and just being stuck in their vehicles, not being able to move. And it's just I think a consideration that needs to be included in pretty much every aspect of discussion regarding a development of this capacity, thousands of units.
Well, we did take a look in the proposed project. One of the studies that we did, and it should be picked up in the draft EIR. And this is the impact of the greenhouse gas impact on intersections. But we came out just fine on that as well. But that is something that you consider as part of. You have to go back on this VMT thing and take a look at your intersection capacities and if there's any greenhouse gas impacts which need to be mitigated that weren't counted on before.
Well, thank you, Robin. So, is there any more hands up? Oh, Bob Mulligan. Let's see. There you go. Go ahead and unmute Bob, and you're up.
The question is for Kirk. I hear a lot of mutterings of SACOG. How do they fit into this puzzle scenario?
The only role that, I mean, this is a local planning issue. SACOG, the only piece that the SACOG's, I don't think they have any say over anything, but one of the things that they did do, and they've continued to do because of state legislation, and not because SACOG's doing it, because the state's making them, is that they had to develop a regional sustainable community strategy. And it had to do with density and impacts on greenhouse gases and things like that. And if you read through the original EIR, there is a section there on this project's potential compliance with sustainable community strategy that was adopted by SACOG pursuant to, I don't know, Senate bill, one of Darrell Steinberg's bills that related to that and transportation funding. So SACOG doesn't have any say over the land use issue. They just have some guidance there. And those of us who worked on the sustainable community strategy with Senator Steinberg and then Senator Steinberg, it was a way to respond to some concerns that the environmentalists had basically about greenhouse gases and transportation planning. That there's no secret hand of SACOG in this project, other than they do have a policy which they've adopted pursuant to state law, requires that they adopt a sustainable community strategy, and that be discussed as part of these projects.
Thank you, Bob. One more to go, and then we're going to close it up. Sita Burgess, if you could go ahead and unmute, you're up.
Hi there, thank you. Just at the last community council meeting, we were discussing there's a new roadway called Saratoga.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, some of the engineer reports and ways we go about trying to estimate, traffic impacts and things. So our DOT came out with an estimate, but I think John Davey probably knows the numbers better than I do, but we're over 4,000, I think, daily trips traveled, and that was several times over the estimate. And so when we're looking at, I know we're in SEQ1, everything's very delineated, but my question as someone kind of newer in this little realm is, who would have that ability to look at this and say, hey, we need to really have a great engineer report on some of these roadways? Because over here on the Pettigrew side, our roads are older, they're narrow, they're beaten up, and thinking of adding more high density over in that area is kind of a harrowing idea to a lot of the local residents over here. And the impacts to all the roadways, I think everyone's a little concerned about that. And so does that come in under conditions of development throughout this process? Or I'm just curious how that gets looked at.
Well, the county has a standard for level of service, which I think is what you're kind of leading to. And there are multiple and significant traffic, what's called TISs, or traffic impact studies, for the proposed project. Taking all of that into account, both existing, expected, and very much in the future conditions. So there was a very thorough analysis of the traffic impacts of that. I will say, and CETA, as it relates to the proposed project, we are proposing a significant reduction in density in the Pedregal planning area from what's allowed by the county general plan and its underlying zoning. So anyway, the answer is there's been significant traffic impact studies done on the proposed project, significant and very detailed. And you can find those in the draft EIR, which was released at the end of 2015 and updated several times in response to changes in policies and changes in condition.
Okay, thank you.
With that, unless there's any go backs from our APAC officers, I did have one clarifying question. I'll invoke some privilege here. On the alternative 4, when we're looking at sort of that zoning consistent alternative, and we're featuring sort of a recreation element in that. One of the aspects of that alternative is that park space that we had talked about in your preferred project, that it would basically be reduced to the 7 acres of probably private parkland. Is that accurate as I read it in the?
Andrew, you want to answer that question? The answer is yes.
Yeah, so if you can see my screen, the dark brown are the land use bubbles of the RFH consistent with the current day zoning. The 7 acres of private parks get scattered around the Pedregal site because the density there in Pedregal is quite a bit more than the proposed project, because again, under the zoning consistent, as it relates specifically to Pedregal, it's 1 to 5 units to the acre for a majority of the site, which is this kind of like peachish sort of color. And then and the brighter orange is the MFR, the multifamily, which is up to 24 units to the acre. So the unit count in Pedregal under existing zoning could be quite a bit higher, which then drives the need to have greater Quimby set-asides, which is why we derive the 7 acres of parks.
And RFH doesn't require any Quimby dedication, does it, Andrea?
No.
So in other words, the golf course, you wouldn't be obligated. You have a residential project, you have a Quimby formula, which determines how much land you have to set aside for park purposes. But in the case of uses like RFH or commercial or shopping centers, that formula just does not apply.
Well, thank you for indulging my question.
Okay.
My privilege is done. Well, we'd like to thank you both tonight for spending so much time with us and going over the new aspects of the recirculated draft environmental impact report. We'll remind residents that that comment period.
Close to our house.
Oops, let me go ahead and bring this up here. Now it's all me. But remind residents that the comment period is a 45-day period. It ends on June 14th. And your comments going in on this is an environmental document, an environmental review. Your comments should be focused, and questions, concerns should be focused on the environmental aspects of what's presented here. It's not about anything else in terms of what the Planning Commission will be hearing in the workshop or what they'll be reviewing as they finish up the recirculated draft environmental impact report and get back to a final. And so with that, we thank you both tonight for spending so much time. The door is open for you to return when you have a need, or if we pester you enough to ask some more questions. But, thank you.
Well, if I could say, member, there's a Planning Commission workshop on May 27th, and I would presume that will be Zoomed, and I would guess you'll get the access to that soon. I also think that we'll be at the Community Council and your June meeting, which I think is still while the comment period is open. John and I just talked about that at lunch this afternoon. So there'll be a couple more bites out of this apple, and then it looks like Planning Commission for a final recommendation to the board sometime in September.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you guys for your time. All right, I'm leaving. Good night.
You can stick around if you want. I'm gonna go ahead and jump back to where's my screen? Hold on, I'll get to this. Okay, so we have 3 brief items to wrap up our meeting tonight, and those are primarily focused on just some updates on what some projects or things that are pending that we have some information about. The first one would be the Bass Lake Road is still closed between essentially the old curve which is the new Silver Springs Parkway intersection and east to Magnolia Hills Drive. You can see there the detour map on the left. Just use the new Silver Springs connection. This is basically what the road looked like at the curve. The curve does not exist anymore. And you can see the grades raised significantly. I think my neighbor for providing the photo. You will notice the grade is basically to the top of the sound wall there. So we had kind of knew that was coming, but there it is. So they are on schedule. I haven't had an update this week. We had heard June 11th would be when the road would reopen, and that new intersection with the right turn lane to continue on to Bass Lake Road would be there. If there's an update, we'll post it on our APAC website and with our APAC social media. The other aspect is that the entire project, the finishing on it, is projected to run through midsummer. We had heard July 4th, strangely enough, but I don't know how accurate that is. When there's an update, we'll provide more information on that. So the next item here, and this is really just sort of an informational item, and Tim and I had talked about this, and I know that I talked to John Ransler about it too. This is something that we had received notification about. This is the new proposed project in the business park, and it's primarily between Latrobe Road, south of Golden Foothills Parkway, and along Robert J. Matthew Parkway. And it's a commercial condo, which a lot of people go, commercial condo, what is that? It's a commercial building that allows businesses to buy a condo in the property to operate their business from, and they own the property, and there's some tax advantages for them. That way they don't have to go, like a doctor's not buying a brand new building to start a practice with. He can buy a suite, and he can grow if there's more available spaces in that. This project's talking about units between 1,000 to 1,500 square feet. There'll be a shared common space between them, and it'll be a gated project like a condo project that's residential. It'll be one parcel and 84 units. We looked at this, and really it's sort of under the purview of the design review and inside the business park. I don't know that APAC, we have the bandwidth or the capacity to review every single project. This one looks like it's pretty straightforward. We'll keep an eye on it. If there's questions we have, we'll ask them, and I just wanted to let residents know that this was a project that's coming up. And Tim, do you have anything to add to that? You and I are going to talk about it.
No, I mean, it basically fits exactly for what the business park is built for. It's sort of a new development, like you said, a commercial condominium, but the uses would be for what the business park is for. It fits within their parameters, and all the design standards, design review will be done by the Business Park Owners Association, and they have control over that anyway. So unless someone really has a major concern with this, and they think APAC should be looking at it, or they want to look at it on behalf of APAC, we're going to leave it to the business park and their owners association to take care of it.
Okay. Well, we have one more item I don't have a slide for, but we'll finish up. Is that at the community council meeting on May 3rd, we CEDA mentioned it a little bit tonight. There was a sort of a review and a discussion of a transportation analysis of the new Saratoga Way intersection at Finders around Arrowhead, and sort of the concerns of the community. And DOT did a review, and as CEDA suggested, they determined that the average daily traffic count there was around 12,000 trips a day, and they had been anticipating it'd be around 8,000 trips a day. But in terms of that interpretation of that analysis, the residents still have a lot of questions. And as we had that conversation at the community council meeting on Monday, kind of thought it was appropriate that maybe we have a community discussion with residents and with the transportation department to better explain their findings and how they've interpreted the analysis and why things can or cannot happen. So to that end, APAC has offered to host a meeting. APAC would just be the host. It would be virtual because that's sort of the life we're living right now. But it'd be virtual, and it'd be for those residents around Saratoga that have an impact and have questions. We're efforting to find a date and a time to do that. I imagine it would have to be in the evening. We would need transportation staff to be available for that. And I know that Brooke is working, she's in the community there, and we had a little conversation today, but as soon as we know that there's a date, we'll make that available to let residents know this is the discussion going on. And even if you don't live in that area, it might be informative to hear what DOT says about how they interpret those analysis, about why maybe you can't have a stop sign nearby in your neighborhood, or why there is a stop sign, or there is a traffic signal coming, or the different elements of what the traffic analysis reveals. So, Brooke, is there anything that you wanted to throw in on that, or?
Oh, yeah, I did want to add something just in the interim. They put up some temporary fencing along Saratoga for that new office building that's going in, but the fencing goes right up against the bike lane, and then the fencing has a tarp on it, and in these windy conditions, the tarp is actually blowing into the bike lane. So I'm not sure if maybe we can reach out and talk to Kelly and just see if they can maybe push the fence back a little bit. It's just creating a really dangerous situation. And I think that where the fence is installed is actually the easement that belongs to the county. That's the area that was designated for the expansion of Saratoga. So the fence shouldn't be there regardless.
So I'll grab the doctor's email address, and then I'll also look for the planner on the project, and I'll get that over to you. And then if you want to discuss it with them, I mean, you're right there in the community. I think it's important to hear from people that are being impacted.
That'd be great. It was actually my son that almost got blown out into the lane because the tarp hit him when he was on his bike. So.
Okay. Well, I'll get that when we're done tonight. I'll get that over to you.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
And then, like I said, we'll make the announcement when we have something scheduled.
Yeah, it definitely to that effect. There are a lot of people involved in the community, and I would need it to be in the evening just to accommodate my work schedule as well.
Me too. That's why we're here. That's why we're here right now.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. And with that, I'm going to jump ahead. Our next meeting for APAC is Wednesday, June 9th. It's the same format we're expecting would be virtual. If there's a change, we'll definitely advise people that when our agenda is published. But for right now, we're looking at 7 p.m. June 9th. I need to hear back from the folks at WIN. We had talked about maybe a discussion of what their project looks like now that the Dorado Hills CSD is in the process of purchasing some land for park space, 50 acres. Essentially, part of it's in their project. So they have some changes they'd like to present to make the community aware. So unless there's any questions from APAC officers.
Yeah, John, real quick. We heard the presentation from Parker Development tonight. Are we thinking, and this is also both to John Davey and John Richard, are we thinking of preparing a report based on the VMT analysis and the 2 additional alternatives, and providing comments to the planning department by the June 14th deadline?
So for my part, I haven't finished really reviewing it to know. I mean, at this point, I don't know that there's a whole lot to be said on the environmental issues with respect to the, new EIR, draft EIR. So kind of on the fence. There are a couple of things I might want to say, but.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty focused, whatever.
Is there any way somebody could Google, like a Google link or something? I can't download all of the documents from the APAC link.
Oh.
For some reason,
the county link.
It's on my computer side. So.
Okay, well, I'll get them to you, but the county links break kind of frequently. So especially if it's an older document. If you have a list of things you want to send me, let me know. But most of those documents, at least in some form, are available on the APAC website. So, but I think along the same lines as John that whatever comments we provide, these are project alternatives. It would have to be pretty focused because there's no extensive detail on the alternatives. I think if anything, we would provide maybe some questions or comments about the VMT, about how the analysis is, devised and how it's implemented and presented as part of the project, because it's new to everyone. So
Can
Yeah,
I, can I just,
Tom, probably my biggest concern, oh, I'm sorry, Brooke.
oh, no, I'm just asking a fundamental question. I mean, before we spend a lot of time on it, how is the board gonna, or how is the planning commission gonna treat the alternatives? I mean, if we're going through all of those in detail, but are they gonna consider each alternative at the planning commission stage?
The alternatives are considered in the final, I believe,
Okay.
right? Am I speaking?
They're basically getting incorporated into the existing
The alternatives-
EIR?
Well, they make that determination when they adopt the final EIR. They make a determination, I believe, but I believe the planning commission would probably provide feedback in advance of those findings. You know, it's a specific plan, so the idea is to be sort of general to accommodate many different things. But yeah, that is sort of, you know, they have a preferred plan, and there are 5 alternatives to the plan. So I'm sure we'll get feedback.
I think the way it'll go is they just have to vote on what's before them, right? I mean, in the proposal is the proposed. Those alternatives are not being proposed. They're just being outlined as a reference, I think, for the planning commission to look at and say, well, gee, maybe we should reject this because there's something else on the table that we like. Or potentially.
I think basically you're throwing it open for negotiation. I mean, if you look at maybe that alternative 4, the no zoning, you know, I don't know if that's being presented as a possible negotiation or as a fallback position, if you would. But I do, you know, ask everyone to take a look at it. I mean, like I said, the VMT analysis put you to sleep, but the alternative, I think it's both alternatives are very, very interesting. They throw out some new ideas that I don't think they had thought of or we had thought of in the past.
Yeah, and I would just encourage any of the community listening to this and the other members here to really dig into that zoning ordinance, because I'm not really convinced that it's being read properly with respect to how the draft EIR was written. So
I can answer that off the cuff. I researched that before. That's absolute BS what was told today. Just from a legal perspective, I can say that. Because that was the basis of my objection going all the way back. I spent a lot of time on it, so.
But yeah, I would expect to hear a lot of public comment on that issue.
Well,
yeah.
The more comment, the better. Questions are good. That generates answers. So if there are no more questions about that, I mean, we'll as APAC voting members, we can circulate among ourselves and see who wants to pitch in. If anybody in the public would like to pitch in, the email address is on our website. There's a contact form there as well, and you can reach out to us. And as we say many times, you know, we appreciate volunteer effort because we are all volunteers. None of us are experts, and we're just providing feedback to the process to hopefully generate a better result in the community. So, and with that, I think we're wrapped up tonight. I thank everybody for attending and for your time, and everybody stay safe, and we hope to see everybody in June.
Thanks a lot, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, John, before you jump off, so my issue is I can't use the APAC link to download. So can you do like a Google Drive, maybe?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, I'll find
something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
It might be big, but I can do it.
I think I have all the old. I just don't have the new stuff. I think I downloaded all the old stuff before to a thumb drive. It's just I don't have the recirculated notice and all of those docs that you just posted.
Okay, I'll grab them and send them over. Actually, they're not that big, but if they're over 25, I'll either send them separately or put them in the Google Drive.
Awesome. Yeah, it's just for some reason my system's blocking it. It's my computer side. They're just blocking my ability to download it from APAC.
Well, we'll grab them.
All right. Thank you.
All righty.
Bye.